Great. Well, sorry about that. And welcome to Zooming Right Along, adapting outreach to schools to a virtual format. My name is Madeline Keck, and I am the Girl Scout Engineering Day Director for the Colorado School of Mines Society of Women Engineers. Before we begin, I'd like to give a brief overview of the topics I will be covering in the course of this presentation. First of all, I'm going to give a brief background on what Girl Scout Engineering Day actually is and how we hosted this in person in past years. I'm also going to talk about my preparations for Girl Scout Engineering Day and the sorts of things I had to consider when I was turning it into a virtual program. I'm also going to talk about the actual day of Girl Scout Engineering Day and how we handled the technical aspects of this. I'm also going to talk about the benefits of virtual outreach and why we are going to continue offering some sort of virtual component even when we can go back to in-person events. So, what is Girl Scout Engineering Day? It's a half day of STEM activities for Girl Scout juniors that we host at the Colorado School of Mines campus. In the past, we have about 200 Girl Scouts attend, and we split them up into smaller groups and rotate them through a variety of different STEM activities so they can see what sorts of future opportunities are available as careers. We also work with the Girl Scouts of Colorado so that all Girl Scouts who attend can earn a Girl Scout Engineering Day patch, as well as work towards various science badges that are offered by the National Girl Scout Organization. So when we had to make the decision to turn all of our outreach events into virtual programs, I had to decide what the most important part of Girl Scout Engineering Day was. And I decided that it was not the science activities. The science activities are cool, but any fourth or fifth grade teacher could do these in their classrooms, or a parent could find them on the internet and work through them with their child at home. They're not unique to Mines, and they're not unique to SWE. But what is unique to this event is that Girl Scouts can make connections with SWE volunteers. They come to this event and they can see that there are women in science like them. And if they choose to pursue science as a future career, they will meet more strong, awesome, enthusiastic women that want to support them and help them thrive in science. And because of this, it was really important for me to ensure that all of our programming for this virtual event has some sort of in-person, face-to-face type component to it, as opposed to just pre-recording all of the activities and sending them out to the Girl Scouts to do on their own time. And so because of that, we decided to do a giant Zoom meeting where we could all be working through these activities together. But before we could do this giant Zoom meeting and start making connections, we first had to make sure everyone had the supplies they needed. This was not something we ever had to consider in the past, as if there was a supply that people needed to do that activity, we would simply hand it out when they got to that activity station. That's not exactly a feasible option during the middle of the pandemic. So instead we turned to supply boxes that we could hand out to individual Girl Scouts. But we still wanted to make this as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So when participants signed up, they had two options to choose from. Number one, they could gather their own supplies and participate for free. Most of the supplies that these activities needed were household items, and if you already had them in your home, we didn't want you to have to pay for them again. But if you didn't have those household supplies, you probably had some sort of substitution that could already work. For example, for my environmental filtration station, you needed some sort of clear vessel that you could see the filtered water dripping into. The original instructions for that activity suggested that you needed a fancy clear mason jar, but I thought that an empty peanut butter jar or a Tupperware container, or even just like a plastic bottle you found off the street would work just as well. Basically, whatever you had at home, that's what you should be using. But if you didn't want to assemble your own supplies, you could also pay $10 and we would send a box of supplies to the individual Girl Scout. Not all of the supplies, unfortunately, were included in these boxes, but the things the Girl Scouts still had to assemble were things like a glass of water, scissors, two large objects that you could run a string between, basically things that would not ship well, because that was our main constraint when picking activities, is that the supplies needed to ship well. So in addition to being durable, they all had to be about the same size because we wanted them to fit in as small a box as possible to cut down shipping costs. But we also didn't want them to be rattling around in the box when it was shaken, because number one, that could be dangerous to the postal workers that have to handle these boxes, but also to the Girl Scouts when they're trying to open them if there's anything broken in them. So in the end, about half of my participants decided to gather their own supplies, and the other half decided to receive a box of supplies from us. So about 2 weeks before the event, I shipped out 80 boxes to Girl Scouts all over the US. This worked fairly well. I used my campus distribution center, so I was unable to track individual boxes, which turned out to be a problem when some people's boxes did not arrive in time for the event. Fortunately, we were able to work with these people and gather what supplies we could and offer refunds for the missing boxes. So everybody had their supplies now, and we could work on actually hosting Girl Scout Engineering Day. I used my campus Zoom account to host a Zoom meeting that could host 300 people for 5 hours. I anticipated Girl Scout Engineering Day would have about 200 people, including my SWE volunteers, and last for 3 hours. So this size of Zoom meeting worked really well for my purposes. For the introduction and the general Women in Science Q&A session that we held, one giant Zoom meeting worked well. But for the individual activities, that was way too chaotic and nothing good happened. So instead, we split the Girl Scouts into breakout rooms. Each breakout room contained somewhere between 4 and 10 Girl Scouts, which we found to be a much more manageable size. The Girl Scouts could interact with each other as well as the SWE volunteers, and the SWE volunteer didn't have to worry about giving the scissors safety talk to 300 people. Each activity lasted for 10 minutes, and then we would rotate the SWE volunteers between breakout rooms, leaving the Girl Scouts in place. This was better than trying to move all of the Girl Scouts at once, but it did have some serious disadvantages. Number one, we had no way to warn the SWE volunteers before they were being moved to the next station. And that meant they were often moved unexpectedly in the middle of their sentence or helping a Girl Scout, which was an unfortunate thing that we couldn't get around. Secondly, we could only have one person moving people between breakout rooms, which meant it was a lot slower than I had anticipated. Many breakout rooms wouldn't have a SWE volunteer for up to 5 minutes. And this wasn't a problem safety-wise, as these Girl Scouts had parental supervision, and they're also just really responsible, awesome girls. But there were a lot of awkward silences and just waiting around for something to happen. Had I anticipated that this would be a really slow transition, I could have made some sort of filler activities to decrease those awkward silences. In the future, I anticipate we will have a variety of different Zoom links, and participants will be able to move themselves between activities when they're ready to rotate. Or if we have an in-person component, then we can have just one Zoom meeting and somebody can physically move the laptop between activities, because I think that will greatly decrease the number of problems we have and smooth everything out. So clearly, there are some serious drawbacks to this virtual event. Why are we going to continue it? As it turns out, the most significant benefit to virtual outreach programs is that we are no longer restricted to Denver metro area Girl Scouts. As you can see here from this graph, about 30% of our participants came from somewhere outside of Colorado. And that's particularly exciting because we did not advertise outside of Colorado. All of our advertising happened through the Girl Scouts of Colorado blog and Facebook page. And the fact that we have all these people from someplace outside of Colorado means that the Colorado Girl Scouts Facebook moms looked at Girl Scout Engineering Day and decided that this was a cool activity that they wanted people to know about. And so they shared it with their friends and their families and their troop leaders so that Girl Scouts from all over could participate. And that makes me hopeful that when we are actively advertising outside of Colorado, for example, putting this on the national Girl Scout Facebook page, how many more people from out of state could we get? I don't know, obviously this is our first year doing this, but I'm excited to find out in the future. And the other benefit to this that is not depicted in this graph is that even within Colorado, we're meeting new people. So some of those new people were just from other cities that are too far to drive to comfortably for just a half day at science activities. But a lot of those Girl Scouts were also from more rural areas that might not have a university that could host these sorts of events and get Girl Scouts introduced to STEM and the women in STEM. And the thing that I found to be the most personally rewarding about doing this is depicted in this picture here with a Girl Scout and her brother working on this activity together. Because I found that when you offer a virtual outreach program, we are not asking the people to come to the science anymore. We are bringing the science to the people. And when you bring the science to the people, it becomes a more community-based thing. So this maybe in the future will not just be Girl Scout Engineering Day. It will be Girl Scouts and their friends and their family Engineering Day, and we can change whole communities at once. So thank you all for listening to my presentation and for the SWE RMS for giving me this opportunity. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those now, or I would also be happy to answer any private chats later on. Thank you.